the desert heat still haunted Emily Rhodes. Dreams even 2 years after her final deployment. She'd wake in cold sweats, the phantom sounds of IEDs echoing in her mind, her heart racing as if she were still dodging sniper fire in Afghanistan. But there was always one constant presence beside her bed, Thor, her German shepherd, whose amber eyes would meet hers in the darkness, steady and knowing. They'd served 3 tours together, Staff Sergeant Rhodes and military working dog Thor in the chaos of Kandahar province. They'd been an unstoppable team. Thor's nose could detect explosives from 50 meters away, his keen senses saving countless lives. Emily had trusted him with everything, her life, her squad's lives, her very soul. When improvised explosive devices claimed 2 of her closest friends, it was Thor who'd found her crying behind the mess tent, pressing his warm body against her shaking frame. Now in the quiet suburbs of Denver, their war was different. Emily's invisible wounds ran deeper than any shrapnel scar. The VA had diagnosed her with severe PTSD, but the medications made her feel like a ghost of herself. Depression settled over her like the Afghan dust that seemed permanently lodged in her lungs some mornings. She couldn't find the strength to leave her bed, but Thor never left her side. The German shepherd, now 7 years old, had adapted to civilian life better than Emily had. His military training remained sharp. He still swept rooms before entering, still positioned himself between Emily and strangers, but he'd developed an uncanny ability to sense her emotional states when the panic attacks hit. Before Emily even felt the first flutter of anxiety, Thor would place his massive head in her lap, his steady breathing becoming her anchor to the present moment. "You saved me over there, boy," Emily would whisper into his fur during the worst nights. "Now you're saving me here, too." Their routine was sacred. Morning runs through the park were disciplined, stride matched Emily's military cadence. Afternoons at the local VA center, where Thor had become an unofficial therapy dog, bringing smiles to other veterans who understood the weight of coming home. Evenings on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains gold, both of them scanning the horizon with the hypervigilance that never quite faded. Dr. Martinez at the VA had suggested Emily consider getting Thor certified as an official emotional support animal, but Emily resisted. "He's not just support," she'd explained. "He's my battle buddy. We don't leave anyone behind." The other veterans understood. There was Tommy, who'd lost his leg to an IED, and Sarah, whose helicopter had gone down in Iraq. They'd gather in the common area, their dogs forming their own pack, while the humans shared stories they couldn't tell anyone else. Thor had become the unofficial leader of the K9 contingent. Calm, protective, intuitive, but Emily had been struggling more lately. The nightmares were getting worse, and she'd started having what she called episodes, moments, where her heart would race, her vision would blur, and she'd feel like she was back in the desert under fire. The doctors adjusted her medications, scheduled more therapy sessions, but Emily felt like she was drowning. "I don't know what's wrong with me, Thor," she'd confessed one evening, her fingers buried in his thick coat. "I should be grateful I'm alive. We both made it home. But some days I feel like I'm still trapped over there." Thor's response was always the same, a soft whine, a gentle nudge. With his wet nose and those knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, he'd position himself so she could feel his heartbeat steady and strong, a reminder that she wasn't alone. The bond they'd forged in the crucible of war had only deepened in civilian life. Other people saw a woman and her dog. Emily knew better. They were 2 souls who'd stared into hell together and come back changed. But unbroken, Thor wasn't just her companion. He was her lifeline, her reason to keep fighting when everything else felt hopeless. Neither of them could have predicted that their greatest battle was yet to come, or that it would take place not in some distant desert, but in the sterile halls of the very hospital meant to heal them in just a few hours. Their unshakable bond would be tested in ways that would leave an entire medical staff speechless and questioning everything they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and the mysterious connections that transcend human understanding. Emily prepared for what she thought would be a routine appointment at the VA hospital. Thor stayed close to her side, his senses already detecting something she couldn't yet perceive: a change in her scent, a subtle alteration in her breathing pattern. The early warning signs of a crisis that would push them both to their absolute limits. The desert had taught them that survival wasn't just about individual strength, it was about having someone you could trust with your life. Tonight, that trust would be tested like never before. VA hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Emily checked in for her routine appointment. It was supposed to be simpler medication review with Dr. Martinez and a quick checkup to monitor her progress. Thor padded beside her, his service dog vest catching the harsh institutional lighting. Other patients smiled at the sight of him. He'd become something of a celebrity at the Denver VA. "Melly Rhodes for Dr. Martinez at 4:30, she told the receptionist, who looked up with a warm smile. "Of course, honey, and how's our favorite 4-leg veteran doing today?" The woman reached toward Thor, who accepted her attention with dignified patience. "He's good. We both are actually having a better week." Emily's voice carried a note of hope that had been absent for months. The new medication adjustments seemed to be helping, and the nightmares had decreased slightly, but as they sat in the waiting area, Thor began to exhibit unusual behavior. His ears flattened against his head, and he kept sniffing the air with increasing agitation. His amber eyes darted between Emily and the hallway leading to the examination rooms, a low whine building in his throat. "What's wrong, boy?" Emily reached down to stroke his head, but Thor pulled away, continuing to pace in the small space their chairs allowed. His military training had taught him to alert to danger, but this was different, more urgent, more personal. 20 minutes later, Dr. Martinez's nurse called them back. "Room 7, Emily. Doctor will be right with you, AS." They walked down the corridor. Thor's agitation intensified. He kept looking back at the pharmacy window. They'd passed his nose, working overtime, but Emily was focused on her appointment, grateful for the doctor, who'd actually listened to her struggles instead of just throwing more pills at the problems up on the table. "If you don't mind, Nurse Patricia said, reaching for the blood pressure cuff. "Just routine vitals first." Thor positioned himself in the corner, but his stance was all wrong. Instead of the relaxed sit-stay he'd perfected, he was coiled like a spring, every muscle tense. His eyes never left Emily's face. The blood pressure reading came back higher than usual. 180/110. "That's elevated for you, Emily. How have you been feeling today?" "Fine, actually really fine. Maybe just nervous." About Emily's words cut off as a wave of dizziness hit her. The room tilted, and she gripped the examination table's edges. Thor was on his feet, instantly, a sharp bark echoing in the small room. "Emily, Emily, can you hear me?" Nurse Patricia's voice seemed to come from far away. Emily tried to respond, but her tongue felt thick, unresponsive. Her vision blurred, the room spinning faster. The nurse hit the emergency call button as Emily slumped forward. Thor erupted into a series of urgent barks, trying to get between Emily and the medical staff who rushed into the room. "Possible drug reaction or cardiac episode," Dr. Martinez announced, appearing with a crash team. "Get her to emergency now." As they transferred Emily to a gurney, Thor refused to be separated. When orderlies tried to hold him back, he showed teeth. Not aggressive, but absolutely determined. Dr. Martinez made a quick decision. "Him come, she's more stable with him." Present. The emergency department exploded into controlled chaos. Emily's blood pressure continued dropping, while her heart rate spiked erratically. Machines beeped urgent warnings as 4 lines were established, and monitors attached. "What medications was she given today?" Dr. Sarachan, the ER attending, called out while examining Emily's pupils, which were dilated and unresponsive. "Nothing." Yet Dr. Martinez replied, checking his notes. She was waiting for her appointment. This came on suddenly. Thor planted himself beside the gurney, his body pressed against it. When nurses tried to move him for procedures, he growled, not threatening, but communicating that he wouldn't be moved. Strangely, his presence seemed to correlate with slight improvements in Emily's vital signs. "Doctor, her pressure's dropping faster." A nurse called out. 90/40 in falling. Dr. Chen reviewed Emily's chart quickly. "Any history of allergic reactions?" "Heart conditions, none documented. She's been stable on her current medications for months." But Thor's behavior was becoming more agitated. He kept looking toward the hallway, then back at Emily, whining and pawing at the gurney. When Nurse Patricia returned from fetching additional medication, Thor barked sharply at her, something he'd never done before. "What's wrong with him?" Dr. Martinez asked. "He's usually so calm." Emily's condition continued deteriorating. Her breathing became shallow, her skin took on a grayish pallor. The machines monitoring her heart showed increasingly dangerous rhythms. "Doctor," the cardiac monitor technician called out, his voice tight with concern. "She's going into VFib." Defibrillator appeared as if from nowhere. "Clear." Dr. Chen shouted. Thor howled as the electrical shock hit Emily's body, the sound echoing through the emergency department like a battle cry. For a moment, her heart rhythm stabilized, but then the dangerous pattern resumed again. Dr. Chen ordered, "Clear." Another shock, another temporary stabilization, followed by renewed crisis. Dr. Martinez pulled Dr. Chen aside, his voice barely above a whisper, but audible in the suddenly quiet room. "Sarah, her brain activity is showing signs of hypoxic damage. If we can't stabilize her, long has she been like this?" 47 minutes since onset. Dr. Chen's expression grew grave. She looked at the monitors, at Emily's still form, at the German Shepherd who hadn't moved from his position. Despite the chaos around them, "She doesn't have long," Dr. Chen said quietly to the assembled team. "Maybe 10 minutes before the damage becomes irreversible." Thor's ears pricked at the tone, if not the words. He looked around the room, at the gray faces, at the machines that beeped with increasing desperation, at his battle buddy, lying motionless on the gurney. What happened next would defy every protocol challenge, every assumption, and leave the medical team questioning everything they thought they knew about the bonds that transcend scientific understanding. Thor had spent years learning to detect explosives, to identify threats, to save lives in the most dangerous corners of the world. Now, facing the greatest threat he'd ever encountered, he was about to demonstrate that some kinds of training go far deeper than military protocols. They come from the heart, from loyalty, from a love that refuses to accept the unacceptable. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the sudden quiet. 10 minutes, maybe less. Thor lifted his head and made a decision that would change everything. The heart monitor's steady beep suddenly flatlined, replaced by the ominous tone that every medical professional dreads. The sound that announces death has entered the room. Emily's body lay still on the gurney, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since returning from Afghanistan time. Of death, 6:47 p.m., Dr. Chen announced, her voice heavy with defeat. She'd fought for Emily for nearly an hour, but sometimes medicine reached its limits. Thor's reaction was immediate and unprecedented. The German shepherd, who had maintained his disciplined military bearing throughout the chaos, suddenly exploded into action. With a powerful leap that defied his 7 years, he launched himself onto the gurney, landing squarely on Emily's chest, his 90-pound frame pressed down as he began barking. Not the alert barks of his military service, but something primal, desperate, heartbroken. Get him off. Dr. Chen shouted security. But as orderlies moved toward Thor, something impossible happened. The flatline monitor stuttered. A single blip appeared on the screen, then another. Wait, the cardiac technician called out, staring at his equipment in confusion. Wait, I'm getting something. Thor ignored the hands trying to pull him away. He lowered his massive head to Emily's face, his wet nose pressing against her cheek. His breathing was rapid, urgent, as if he was trying to share his own life force with her. Doctor, look at this. The technician's voice cracked with disbelief. Her heart rate is climbing. Weak, but it's there. Dr. Chen pushed through the crowd around the gurney. The monitor that had shown nothing but the cruel flat line of death now displayed a faint but unmistakable rhythm. That's impossible. She was clinically dead for 3 minutes. Thor began licking Emily's face with desperate intensity, his warm tongue working across her cold skin. Between licks, he whined a sound so mournful, so filled with pleading, that it brought tears to the eyes of seasoned emergency room staff who'd thought they'd seen everything. Should we sedate the dog? A nurse asked, but her voice lacked conviction. Something about what they were witnessing felt too profound to interrupt. No. Dr. Martinez said quietly. Look at her vital. Blood pressure, which had crashed to nearly nothing, began registering measurable numbers. Her breathing, which had stopped, resumed in shallow but consistent patterns. Most remarkably, her brain activity monitor, which had shown the flat patterns of neurological death, began displaying faint electrical activity. Thor adjusted his position, lying partially across Emily's body, while keeping his head near hers. His amber eyes never left her face, watching for any sign of recognition, any hint that his battle buddy was fighting her way back to him. In 20 years of emergency medicine, Dr. Chen whispered to Dr. Martinez, I have never seen anything like this. The cardiac stimulation from his weight, the warmth, the I don't even know what to call it determination. Dr. Martinez replied, he's not letting her go. 5 more minutes passed. Thor maintained his vigil, occasionally nudging Emily's face with his nose, making soft sounds that seemed almost conversational, as if he were coaxing her back from wherever she'd gone. Then Emily's eyelids fluttered. The collective intake of breath from the medical staff was audible. Thor's tail began wagging for the first time since the crisis began, though he didn't move from his protective position over her. Emily. Dr. Chen leaned over them both. Emily, can you hear me? No response, but her breathing deepened. The heart monitor showed strengthening rhythms. Thor made a decision that surprised everyone. He carefully repositioned himself alongside the gurney instead of on top of it, but kept his head resting on Emily's arm. His message was clear. He wasn't leaving, but he'd allowed the medical team to work. What's her neurological status? Dr. Chen asked the technician, monitoring brain activity. This is going to sound crazy, but the areas that were showing hypoxic damage 20 minutes ago, they're lighting up again, especially the limbic system, the parts of the brain that process emotion and memory. Dr. Martinez shook his head in amazement. The limbic system is where the human-animal bond is processed, the parts of her brain responsible for recognizing and responding to Thor, as if responding to his name. Thor lifted his head and looked directly at Dr. Martinez, then back at Emily. His tail wagged once deliberately, as if to say, she's coming back, and she was. Emily's fingers, which had been still as death, began to twitch. Thor immediately pressed his nose against her palm, and her fingers instinctively curved around his muzzle, the same gesture she'd made countless times during their worst nights with PTSD. Breathed Dr. Chen. Her body is responding to his presence on a neurological level. The tactile stimulation, the familiar scent, the warmth. It's like he's rewiring her brain's will to live. But Thor wasn't done. As Emily's condition continued stabilizing, he began exhibiting the alert behaviors from his military service, his head lifted, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. His gaze fixed on something beyond the emergency room, specifically the hallway leading back to the pharmacy. He barked once, sharply, then looked back at the medical team with an expression that seemed almost human in its urgency. What is it, boy? Dr. Martinez asked. Thor barked again, then did something that would prove to be the most important action of the entire crisis. He jumped down from the gurney and moved toward the door, looking back to ensure they were following. Emily's vital signs remained stable, though she hadn't fully regained consciousness. Dr. Chen made a decision that would change everything. Follow the dog, she said. I think he's trying to tell us something. What Thor led them to discover would unravel a mystery that had nearly cost Emily her life, and revealed that his military training had been detecting a threat that none of the medical professionals had even considered. The battle-tested German shepherd had always been able to sniff out danger. This time the explosive he'd detected wasn't made of TNT or C4, it was something far more insidious, hidden in plain sight, in the very place meant to heal. Emily's condition stabilized over the next several hours. But she remained unconscious, trapped in a state that the medical team couldn't fully explain. Her vitals were strong, her heart rhythm steady, yet she seemed suspended between waking and sleeping, between life and whatever place she'd visited during those terrifying minutes of flatline. Thor never left her side. Dr. Chen had arranged for a bed in the ICU, bending hospital rules to allow Thor to remain with Emily given what we witnessed. In the ER, she'd explained to the hospital administrator, "I'm not willing to separate them, her neurological responses are directly tied to his presence." The German Shepherd had stationed himself on a large pillow beside Emily's bed, his head resting on the mattress near her hand. Every few minutes he would lift his head to check her breathing, then settle back down with a soft sigh. His amber eyes rarely closed, maintaining the kind of vigilant watch he'd perfected during their military service. Sarah Yamamoto, the hospital's leading neurologist, arrived at dawn to review Emily's case. She spent an hour studying the brain scans, comparing the images taken during Emily's crisis with the ones from the previous evening. "This shouldn't be possible," she told Dr. Chen as they stood outside Emily's room, watching Thor's steadfast vigil through the window. "Look at these scans. The areas that showed severe hypoxic damage during her cardiac arrest, the hippocampus, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, they're not just recovering, they're more active than her baseline." Normal. Dr. Chen nodded toward Thor. "Ever since he brought her back, her brain activity has been focused in the areas responsible for emotional processing and memory formation. It's like her consciousness is rebuilding itself around their connection. I've never seen anything like it." The medical literature has a few cases of unusual recoveries associated with emotional trauma or strong personal connections, but nothing this dramatic. Her brain was clinically dead. Sarah, for over 3 minutes inside the room. Thor's ears perked up. He lifted his head and looked directly at Emily's face, tail beginning to wag softly. The women looked at the monitors. Emily's brain activity was spiking. They rushed into the room as Emily's eyes fluttered open for the first time since her collapse. Her gaze was unfocused, confused, but when it landed on Thor, something clicked into place. "Thor," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but unmistakably present. The German Shepherd's response was immediate and overwhelming. He stood carefully, placed his front paws on the bed, and began licking her face with gentle, reverent touches. Emily's hands, still weak, managed to find his fur. "Hey boy," she breathed. "What happened to me?" Dr. Chen approached slowly. "Emily, you're in the hospital. You had a severe medical episode yesterday evening. How do you feel?" Emily's brow furrowed as she tried to process the information. "I remember waiting for Dr. Martinez then. Everything went dark, but Thor was there even in the dark. I could feel him." Dr. Yamamoto exchanged glances with Dr. Chen. "Emily, what do you remember about being in the darkness?" "It was like being back in Afghanistan, but worse. I was trapped somewhere. Couldn't find my way out, but I kept hearing Thor barking, calling me back. His voice was the only thing that felt real." Thor settled back onto his pillow, but kept his chin resting on the bed where Emily could maintain contact with him. His presence seemed to anchor her to consciousness in a way that was both mysterious and undeniable. Over the next few hours, as Emily's strength gradually returned, the medical team worked to understand what had caused her near-fatal episode. Her blood work showed no signs of allergic reaction, heart attack, or drug interaction. All the obvious culprits came back negative, but Thor's behavior remained unusual. While he stayed protectively close to Emily, he continued to exhibit alerting behaviors whenever certain hospital staff members entered the room. Most notably, he showed distinct agitation when Kevin Morrison, one of the pharmacy technicians, came by to check on Emily's for medications. "I don't understand it," Emily said, watching Thor's reaction. "He's trained to detect explosives and threats, but he's treating Kevin like he's dangerous." Kevin's been nothing but kind. Dr. Martinez, who had arrived for his morning rounds, observed the interaction carefully. "Thor's military training focused on scent detection, right? What if he's picking up on something we're missing?" "Like what?" Dr. Chen asked. "I don't know, but his instincts saved Emily's life once already. Maybe we should pay it." Emily's. If understanding the conversation, Thor stood and walked to Emily's for stand. He sniffed around the various bags and lines, then sat and looked pointedly at the medical team, the same alert posture he'd used in Afghanistan to signal the presence of explosives. Dr. Yamamoto frowned. "When that these 4 medications get prepared?" "Yesterday evening," Morrison replied quickly. "Standard protocol. Everything's been properly labeled and checked." But Thor barked once sharply at Morrison's voice, then returned his attention to the 4 setup. "I want those medications tested." Dr. Chen decided all of them. "Full analysis? That seems excessive," Morrison began, but Dr. Martinez cut him off. "The dog brought a clinically dead patient back to life. If he's telling us there's something wrong with those IVs, we're going to listen. What the laboratory analysis revealed would rock the hospital to its core and explain not only Emily's mysterious collapse, but also expose a pattern of accidents that had been dismissed as unfortunate complications. Thor had detected something that sophisticated medical equipment and trained professionals had missed his nose trained to save lives in the most dangerous circumstances, had identified a threat that was literally flowing through Emily's veins. The military working dog who had already performed one miracle by refusing to let his battle buddy die was about to uncover a truth that would save countless other lives. Emily squeezed his fur gently as the lab technicians worked. "You've been trying to tell us something all along, haven't you, boy?" Thor's tail wagged once and he rested his head more firmly against her. And his job wasn't finished, yet the laboratory results arrived at 2 p.m. and Dr. Chen's hands shook as she read the report. She immediately called for hospital security and requested an emergency meeting with the chief of staff. The implications were staggering. For saline solution was contaminated with potassium chloride. She announced to the assembled team a concentration that would have been fatal within minutes if he hadn't done what he did. Dr. Martinez stared at the report. Potassium chloride. That's not something that accidentally gets into saline bags. No, it's not. And according to these results, the contamination was recent, added after the bag was manufactured, but before it was hung on Emily's forepaw. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Someone had deliberately tried to kill Emily in the ICU. Thor continued his vigilant watch, but his demeanor had shifted. Where before he'd been anxious and alerting, now he seemed purposeful, almost mission. When Kevin Morrison appeared in the doorway for the third time that day, Thor's response was immediate and definitive. He positioned himself between Morrison and Emily's bed. Hackles raised a low growl, rumbling in his chest. This wasn't the uncertain, alerting behavior of earlier. This was the absolute certainty of a military working dog identifying a confirmed threat. "I think you need to step away from my patient, Dr. Chen said, entering the room with 2 security officers behind her. Face went pale. "I don't know what you're implying, but we're implying that Emily Rhodes' for solution was deliberately contaminated with a lethal dose of potassium chloride, and that her service dog has been trying to tell us you were responsible since this whole thing started." Morrison backed toward the door, but the security officers blocked his exit. Thor never moved from his protective stance, but his growl intensified. "This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of a dog over evidence." Dr. Chen produced the lab report, or over the testimony of a dozen witnesses who watched that dog perform CPR and refused to let his handler die. The investigation that followed revealed that Morrison had been systematically targeting veterans at the VA hospital for over 8 months, patients with PTSD, depression, and other invisible wounds. People whose deaths might be attributed to suicide or accidental overdose. Emily had simply been his latest intended victim, but Morrison hadn't counted on Thor. The German Shepherd's military training had detected the chemical contamination before Emily had even received the for his agitation in the waiting room, his alerting behavior around Morrison, his absolute refusal to leave Emily's side during her crisis. It had all been protective instinct combined with detection skills honed in the world's most dangerous combat zones. As the security officers led Morrison away, he turned back toward Emily's room. "You can't prove anything. It could have been anyone with access to." Thor's bark cut him off, not aggressive, but final, definitive. The sound of a soldier who had completed his mission. Emily, who had been listening to the revelations from her hospital bed, reached over and buried her face in Thor's thick coat. "You saved my life in more ways than one, didn't you, boy?" The story spread quickly through the hospital, then through the VA system, and eventually across the country. Major news networks picked up the story of the military working dog who had literally brought his handler back from the dead and then exposed a serial killer targeting veterans. But for Emily and Thor, the media attention was secondary to something more profound that had happened during those crucial moments in the emergency room. Emily's near-death experience, followed by her miraculous recovery, had fundamentally changed her relationship with the PTSD that had haunted her for years. "It's like he pulled me back from more than just death," she explained to Dr. Martinez during her follow-up appointment a week later. "The nightmares are different now, less frightening. It's like Thor's voice in that darkness reset something in my brain." Dear Yamamoto's follow-up neurological scans supported Emily's subjective experience. The brain regions associated with trauma response showed significant positive changes, while the areas responsible for emotional regulation and stress management were more active than they'd been since before her deployment. From a medical standpoint, Dr. Yamamoto explained what Thor did shouldn't have been possible, but the brain scans don't lie. The combination of physical stimulation, emotional bonding, and his absolute refusal to accept your death appears to have triggered neuroplastic changes that we're only beginning to understand. 3 months later, Emily and Thor stood on a stage in Washington, D.C. as Thor received the Animals in War and Peace Medal of Bravery, the highest honor that could be bestowed upon a military working dog. Emily wore her dress uniform the first time she'd put it on since returning from Afghanistan. The auditorium was filled with veterans, their families, medical professionals from across the country, and military officials who had come to witness this unprecedented recognition. Emily had been asked to speak about their experience, but as she stepped up to the microphone, she realized that words couldn't capture the profound bond that had literally conquered death. Thor And I learned something in Afghanistan that took almost losing each other to truly understand, she began, her voice steady for the first time in years. We learned that some bonds go deeper than training, deeper than duty, deeper even than life and death. She looked down at Thor, who sat at perfect attention beside the podium, his German shepherd dignity intact despite the cameras and crowds. When I was trapped in that darkness dying, I heard his voice calling me back, not just his bark, but his heart speaking to mine. He refused to let me go, and in refusing, he gave me back more than just my life. He gave me back my will to live. The audience was completely silent as Emily knelt beside Thor, placing her hand on his head as the medal was presented. Thor didn't just save me that day in the hospital, he's been saving me every day since we came home from war. Today I want him to know something. She leaned close to Thor's ear, and though she spoke quietly, the microphone picked up her words. You can rest now. Boy, your mission is complete. We both made it home. Thor's response brought tears to eyes throughout the auditorium. The disciplined military working dog who had maintained perfect posture throughout the ceremony gently laid his massive head in Emily's lap. His amber eyes, which had remained alert and vigilant for so many years, slowly closed, not in death but in peace. In the months that followed, Emily and Thor became advocates for veteran mental health and the therapeutic benefits of service animals. Their story inspired changes in VA protocols, increased funding for military working dog programs, and renewed research into the neurological basis of human-animal bonds. But for Emily and Thor, the most important change was personal. The nightmares that had haunted Emily for years gradually faded. Her PTSD, while not cured, became manageable in ways it had never been before. Thor, meanwhile, seemed to have fulfilled some deep purpose that allowed him to finally transition from warrior to companion. They still took their morning runs through the Denver parks, still sat on the porch watching sunsets over the Rocky Mountains. But now, instead of scanning the horizon with the hypervigilance of soldiers who had never quite left the battlefield, they watched with the peaceful awareness of two souls who had found their way home. Emily had been right about one thing: they hadn't left anyone behind, not in Afghanistan, and not in that hospital room where death had tried to claim her. Thor's final act hadn't just saved her life, it had shown the world that some kinds of love are stronger than death itself, and that the bonds forged in service to something greater than ourselves can literally work miracles. As they sat together in the fading light, Emily's hand resting in Thor's fur, both of them understood that their greatest battle hadn't been fought in some distant desert, but in a sterile hospital room where a dog's refusal to accept the unacceptable had changed everything. Good boy, Emily whispered as she had countless times before, but this time Thor's tail wagged, not with the eager energy of a dog seeking approval, but with the quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplished, a promise kept, and a battle buddy brought safely home. They were both finally truly at peace.